Record. Hello, everybody. My name is Rob Prince. I'm here with my colleague Ibrahim Kazerooni. We, for the past really 20 years, have been doing dialogues, mostly on the Middle East, but on other subjects as well. And over the last 12 years, we were political commentators on a program called at KGNU, Hemispheres, what was referred to as the Middle East Dialogues. We've moved on from there now, and we're doing these freelance programs. And tonight's program, we refer to it, we call it the Israeli pickle, okay? That Israel is in a kind of dilemma and not sure what to do, not sure what to do about what, about going to war against Lebanon and Syria maybe. So we want to talk about what is this pickle, what's the background to this situation. I know many people, when we say that Israel is in a bind, it's hard for particularly American listeners to believe it. It's like, Israel looks so strong, military and all that. And what we're seeing is that over the past few years, its options have narrowed considerably. So for starters, Ibrahim, can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you see this Israeli pickle, this bind that they're in, that a lot of our friends don't recognize?
Well, good evening to everyone. Good evening to you, Rob.
Good evening.
It's, as we were discussing to look at a pertinent and relevant topic, if you remember, the anniversary, the 17th anniversary of the 2006 war with Lebanon came up. Strangely enough, all the newspapers, or at least most reliable newspapers in Israel, they were constantly talking about the possibility of war, but a different war, not a war that Israel can win or can conduct. They were talking about this united war of opposition against Israel, which covered the entire north as well as south, which
South
means
of
Gaza.
South of Israel, yeah.
Hmm?
South of Israel, right.
Yes, south of Israel. North of Israel, which was the Lebanese and Syrian border, and south of Israel, which covered Gaza, but adding another variable into the whole thing, and that was the Yemenis, Houthi Yemenis, that they said if a war starts, they are going to get into it, not to mention the Iraqi Hezbollah and resistant movement in Iraq, that they said they are going to go join. So this combination became extremely lethal and unbearable for the Israelis, that they have made, they become paralyzed. On the one hand, they want, since 2000 literally, defeat, the Israelis have been preparing to take revenge, so to speak, for their defeat. The problem is, as time went on, and they thought the opportunity was there in 2006 for the annihilation and wiping out Hezbollah, and it didn't happen. The report that came out under the title of "We Were Caught Unprepared," the 2006 Hezbollah-Israeli war by Matt Matthews, which was part of the Long War Series occasional paper number 26, clearly the title indicates that nobody, the Israelis, neither the Americans nor the Israelis, neither the Americans were prepared for the result that took place. 2006 has created a unique, literally ontological or worldview for the Israelis, which is not different from Vietnam in the mindset and psyche of United States. Okay, and we call it the Vietnam syndrome.
So
Go ahead.
there's the Vietnam syndrome that from my perspective, the United States has never gotten over the defeat that it suffered in Vietnam. And now we can talk about, for Israel, the 2006 syndrome. And I mean, look, that war is, 17 years ago now? And yet, as we're going to argue and try to convince our listeners, Israel has not gotten over that 2006 war. But before we go to that war, I want to just respond to some of the stuff that you've been talking about, Ibrahim, because if we look at what Israel has been successful at doing, really since its formation, is a classic example of divide and conquer, if you like, splitting up what could be an alliance against it. And it starts off with the splitting up of the Palestinian community into a number of isolated groups. So the Palestinians that are within the 1967 borders of Israel, that's one reality. Second reality, actually, the West Bank and Gaza are somewhat different realities, but still, that we talk about the 67 territories. And then there are the Palestinians in the refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria and other places as well. And so,
not to mention, Rob, the Palestinians in the 1948 land, which is what is considered to be 1948
yes,
Palestinian, the Israeli proper. One of the fundamental principles, what we call it Ben-Gurion's military strategy or doctrine, was to divide and never allow these Palestinians or their opponents, Israeli opponents, to coagulate and become united. This is even in 1973, when Kissinger was flying around trying to organize some kind of a peace treaty between the Arabs. Israelis were insistent that the peace treaty has to be signed by individual countries rather than collectively. And that fragmentation, unfortunately for the Israelis, that they were hoping never to happen again, now that fragmentation has gone, and we've seen becoming together. And that itself it's, if we want, an indicative of what has happened since 2006 for the Israelis.
So we see among the Palestinians a kind of the beginning of a coagulation, a kind of coordinated effort to stand up to Israel that really we have not seen before. So that's on one level, and then on the other level, there's something else that's gone on that in the long term is going to add to this growing Palestinian unity. And people don't always appreciate it, but that is the Chinese organized reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And so once again, the United States was able to divide and conquer, keep these different factions of the region fighting with one another and at war with one another. As they come together, and again, we don't have to overstate it, but still, great progress in terms of that reconciliation. I was just seeing yesterday the Iranian ambassador to Saudi Arabia was about to take his place, to open his office in Riyadh. And we should not underestimate what that means long term for the Palestinians, i.e., on the one hand, you have the Palestinian movement itself that's coming together. And then on the other hand, we have that reconciliation, which is going to have political overtones. And we have something else that is not really discussed here in the United States, hardly at all. And that is an alliance that's referred to as the Axis of Resistance, that brings together a whole variety of forces, which I'm going to ask you to talk about. But before that, I'm really interested in this alliance because it's a new kind of alliance, i.e., during the Cold War, the alliances were, you could call them, they were pro-imperialist or anti-imperialist, i.e., alliances were based on ideology to a very, very great degree. This alliance is quite different. You have a country essentially secular, like the Syrian government, cooperating with Iran, with the Islamic Republic of Iran, ideologically at very, very different places. And now we have so almost a decade, really, of cooperation between these different elements. So can you talk a little bit about this? What is this axis of resistance, and how does it fit? How has it changed, if you like, the regional chemistry?
Well, Rob, if we want to understand the critical importance of the axis of resistance and how pivotal role they are playing in what we call anti-American, anti-imperialist in the region, we really need to go back to what Condoleezza Rice talked to in the 2006 about the reconstruction of a new Middle East, which was one between us, we have discussed this, which was what we call it the Sykes-Picot number 2. If Sykes-Picot of 1920, of 1917 dismantled Middle East from the Ottoman Empire, broke it down into some small countries, the desire of United States in reconstructing the Middle East under even a smaller versions.
Right. Break it down even further.
Yes, break it up further. So the 2006 reference by Condoleezza Rice of "This is a pain of the birth of new Middle East" was in reference to what United States had already initiated by occupying Iraq and Afghanistan. Their idea was we need to wipe out Hezbollah.
Right.
And after wiping out Hezbollah, then it was kind of the next step was to go for Syria, and after that Iran and Libya, etc., etc. What was critical in this plan, people, unfortunately, in the United States, they really have no clue that it was a collaboration between the United States and the Israelis for this plan to be unpacked by attacking the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And it was done very close to your house now, Rob. It was in Vale.
Oh, there was was it Vale? Oh, yeah, it was in
Yes, it was in Vale.
In Vale, and this was just prior to the 2000.
Yeah, a few months prior to this,
where the United States and Israel got together and they cooked up their
tough
for you.
Yeah,
because here in the United States, they when you say, well, look, there was an American plan to destroy regime change in Iraq and in Syria and in Libya and in Yemen and ultimately in Iran, and people say, you're nuts, that's not true. How do we know that do we know there was a plan? What's the evidence of that plan?
Yes, that's what you go to General Clark,
Right.
2002.
Wesley Clark. Yeah.
Yes, he talked about many years ago, and it is available online if you type his name. He said that he went to CIA or somewhere, Secretary of Defense. Defense Department, and they showed him a plan that these are the countries that they intend to attack. And this was before even they attacked Iraq, but this was part of the plan.
2001, 2002, yeah.
Yeah, so the Vale meeting seminar, that top brass Israeli military officials as well as the United States participated. The plan was quite clear. This is why this guy, the military guy, Matt Matthew, says we were caught unprepared.
Yes.
The preparation was they automatically assumed. I like the expression you used in some of your literature. You say that it was a walk in the park.
Yes.
The Israelis thought that it was going to be a walk in the park for them. They never anticipated such a reaction from the Hezbollah, and for 33 days, Israelis landed over 110,000 troops in Lebanon. from both the land, the Air Force, as well as the Navy. 110,000. They, Israelis, said at that time that the Hezbollah was fighting them with 3 battalions of 7,000 each. So 110,000 against maximum 21,000. They did everything possible. They say that the amount of bombs that the Israelis dropped, dropped in Lebanon, they have never done that in any of their wars, or possibly all their wars put together. And yet they failed to subdue Hezbollah. And Hezbollah's weapon was, or missiles were hitting Israelis left, right, and center. 2 weeks, according to the report, 2 weeks after the war started, Israelis were prepared to throw in the towel and accept defeat or some kind of negotiation. It was United States that was not prepared to accept this defeat.
And push them to continue.
Exactly.
There's an interesting contrast. We won't get
just before you go on.
Right.
It was the United States that, when Security Council repeatedly proposed some kind of a ceasefire, it was United States that would veto it and would not accept it, hoping that Israelis would win in 2 days from now, 3 days from now, and ultimately it reached a point after 33 days that they were disappointed. So Bush said indirectly to Olmert that they were extremely disappointed for the result, Israelis not being able to succeed. Go ahead.
Well, we'll talk about the consequences in a moment of that war. First, I just wanted to detail to the listeners the report that Ibrahim is talking about is entitled "The U.S. Army Combined Arms Control Studies Institute Press from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas." That's who did it. I.e., it's an Army report. "We were caught unprepared. The 2006 Hezbollah-Israeli war," by CSI historian Mr. Matt M. Matthews. So if you go to "We were caught unprepared, the 2006 Hezbollah-Israeli war," you Google that, this report will come up. And there was another report, the Winograd report, which
the Vinograd, yeah.
What? Did I get that right?
The Vinograd report.
Yes, which was an Israeli report, which was, you'll get Ibrahim talking about that in a second. But what I wanted to say, and we're not going to get into this, but think about this. The war in Ukraine starts, okay? And the Zelensky government is, not only is it willing to negotiate with Russia on the grievances that the Russian had, the document was signed already. And what happens? The British, pushed by Washington, come in, say, no, you can't do that. I.e., when the United States, when the result is not what it wants, it pushes its proxies to keep fighting even against their own will. So that's what happened in 2006. And it created a kind of underlying tension. And all right, so another thing about this war, because some of the Jewish friends I have, Israelis or Israeli supporters here, they say, well, look, you're exaggerating, okay? Hezbollah did not win that war. And I say to them, if you look at history, until the 2006 war, Israel was never fought to a draw. That's number one. Number two, they were forced to withdraw from that activity. And then you see what the U.S. Army U.S. Army analysts are saying about that war. And I want to read you from this Matthews report what he said. Without question, this is from the introduction, but the Israeli ground campaign revealed an army confused by its new doctrine, how to fight the Lebanese. Israeli soldiers, were deficient in training and equipment, and senior officers seemed woefully unprepared to fight, and then in quotations, a real war. By the time the United Nations ceasefire went into effect on the 14th of August, 2006, many military analysts were convinced the IDF, that is the Israeli Defense Force, had suffered a significant defeat. One source held that Hezbollah's military and political victory was absolute and irrefutable. Even more revealing were the comments of Mossad chief Meir Dagan and the head of the Shin Bet, Yuval Dishkin, during a meeting with Prime Minister Olmert in the immediate aftermath of the war. Both men pointedly told Prime Minister Olmert the war was a national catastrophe and Israel has suffered a critical blow. I would say,
and not only, Rob, not only these are what we call from the horse's mouth, from the people who were inside. Olmert, under pressure, accepted a commission of inquiry that initially the chief of the army or somebody from Mossad and so on, retired army officers, and ultimately was given by a retired judge, Vinegret, to oversee this commission and conclude. So around middle or to late part of 2006, their final report came out in 2008.
right.
I would like our listeners to go and read a Vinegret report, commission report, and see how Israeli military officers, retired and active, they look at the 33 days war in Lebanon, and they see it as nothing but an absolute and catastrophic failure and defeat for the Israelis. So Israel lost. The consequence, now we go back
let's
to
talk about what are the why are we
that's what I
talking
was
about
going-
this war today?
Yeah. So once once we accept that loss, the winning of which, by the way, at least three component, the Lebanese victory had also a Syrian part in it and an Iranian part in it, because they were the one who were providing, Syria was providing them with anti-tank weapons that they used brilliantly against Merkava 4, and the Israelis they slaughtered these tanks.
40 tanks were put out of commission.
Yeah, in one battle, Vintage Vale, in a wadi, in a valley, 40 some tanks were hit and destroyed with a matter of hours. And the Iranians were part of involved. Qasem Soleimani was with part of the planning for and the continuation of this war. So three members of what later on became the Axis of Resistance were there. So Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. Then the Iraqis after that came to support. So Axis of Resistance is nothing but a group of people that they may have ideological differences, but they have something in common, and that is their resistance and opposition to any plan that the United States trying to impose on the region. Now, even Yemen has been included within the Axis of Resistance, because they are operating that way as well. So it includes resistance against United States presence and against United States plan for the region. Once Hezbollah was not annihilated or defeated, then naturally, by coming together of these countries, that plan for the new Middle East disintegrated, and ultimately it opened up the space for a new dynamics to take control in the region. And this is what the Israelis are now in a pickle trying to deal with.
And they're finding it increasingly difficult on a broader scale. All right. There's a lot of things going on, and I'm looking back at what was the U.S. doing, what were their goals, and already as soon as Obama comes into office in 2008, he talks about this shift to Asia. And part of the idea of the shift to Asia was, quote, finishing the business, i.e. creating what Condoleezza referred to as the new Middle East, i.e. U.S. restructuring of the Middle East. So the first step of that process was eliminating Hezbollah. When that failed, the rest of those steps became more complicated. So yes, we know what happened in Iraq, we know what happened in Libya, but when it came to Syria, the U.S. and Israel failed. They failed to be able to implement that plan. And now we're looking at a situation where not only is Israel in this pickle because of the regional alliances, but the Arab world that are coming to Arab and Iranian world coming together. But beyond that, there's something else. The United States is less and less willing to get drawn in itself militarily in a major way. And this is what Israel is always trying to do, get the United States to be, part of the military mix. So that's part of the pickle. Part of the pickle for Israel is growing U.S. reluctance. United States wants to deal with Ukraine. It wants to deal with China. And it wants to settle this Middle East stuff. And it's not going its way at all. Right, there's one other thing I want to bring in here, Ibrahim, and that is we're also looking at a time where the global balance of power is shifting. And it's relevant to the Middle East because up until this time, there was really only, if you like, one peace broker in the region, and that was the United States. Today, it's a very different world. The influence of the Russians, the influence of the Chinese, this agreement, this beginning of a reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which I referred to earlier, that is a very, very big regional game changer. Reduction of U.S. influence. Now, when I say reduction of U.S. influence, let me just specify what that means. The United States can no longer dictate the regional policy. It's not to say.
And by the way, Rob, Israelis now know about it.
Yes, and they understand it.
Recent articles in Yadaout Aharnot and few other newspapers clearly indicated that we are in this, we are on our own.
Yes, that's
and
right.
Because now they find themselves on their own and then a united front against them. This is why it makes it such a pickle for the Israelis to go to war.
Right, so let me add this, Ibrahim. So the U.S. response to this is to push Israel to create what is referred to here in the United States during the Trump years as the Abrahamic Accords. And the Abrahamic Accords was basically a strategic alliance. Pretty much, it was targeting, the main target is Iran. But certainly, part of the mix was strengthening the position of Israel by giving it a powerful Arab ally. So that comes into being, although the Saudis formally aren't part of it, but still they're in the mix, let's say informally. And then China comes along and just undercuts that Abrahamic initiative so that it's pretty much worthless today. And once Saudi Arabia and Iran begin to improve their relations, from what I see, this Abrahamic initiative, it has nowhere to go.
In reality, it's dead and buried, but Israelis would like to resurrect it somehow, or at least make it more active, because one or two of the Gulf state, Persian Gulf state, they are still part of it, like Bahrain. But the fact that the Israelis are unable to draw Saudi Arabia into this equation, and others, even United Arab Emirates, withdrew from what we call the military exercise in the Persian Gulf, and they said no, they are not going to do it. So the more they strengthen their relationship with the Iranians, the less likely they are going to be part of this so-called accord, which, as you said correctly, the main goal, despite the narratives or the cloak of Abraham and the religious issues. We are all part of the same kumbaya, as we say it. The whole game was as a front for the Israelis to find footstep in the Gulf, because ultimately they wanted to start something with Iran. Now, for them, United States is busy with China and Ukraine, and the plan is not working. Russians and Chinese are actively working in the region. United front in the north as well as the south against the Israelis. The military leaders constantly talk about the fact that on a long run, if the war starts, we are going to be defeated, and not only defeated, the internal part of the country will be damaged beyond acceptability and beyond belief.
Israel,
So
yes.
this is something that we go back to, again, Ben-Gurion doctrine, when he was asked about what gives you makes such a unique position for the Israelis. He said it's not our weapon,
Right.
it's the mind of our opponent. If we can convince them that they cannot defeat us and they stay away from challenging us, then we have the freedom to do whatever we want. The problem for the Israelis, or the pickle, lies in the fact that nobody is afraid of Israel. That myth has evaporated. Now, even look, recently they wanted to go back to Jenin, a small camp within the they couldn't. The second day, they were afraid of being hit. They had to withdraw.
And before in Gaza, a few months ago,
The same thing
similarly,
in Gaza.
they a couple of days attack, and then
Immediately ceasefire.
yes, that's right.
They send Egyptians in. Let's negotiate a long-term ceasefire. And up to now, they are afraid of challenging Hamas in Gaza because of the consequence.
Yes. So this is the pickle. This is the pickle. I think, from where I'm sitting, it's not so much that the changes are going to happen overnight, but that Israel's options in the region are shrinking. Particularly its options for war and for using war to further its political aims. So let me ask you one final question here, Ibrahim. If Israel's options and Israel-U.S. options for war, particularly against Lebanon, this thing you talked about, right? They go after Jenin for a couple of days and kill some Palestinians in a very ugly way, and then they lob some missiles to Damascus. But they're doing that because they're afraid to do what they really want to do, which is a big war against Lebanon. Is that a cynical view, or is that accurate?
No, that's close enough. But the problem is
right.
Close enough. But the problem is that even attacking Syria, recently Syrians have responded by few missiles that have landed. These missiles, one close to the nuclear site in Israel, and the other one is in northern Israel, that landed close to one of the cities as a warning. Now, if the Syrians decide that every action has a reaction, you hit them, they hit you back, that is the slippery slope that is going to go to war.
All right.
The same thing happens with Lebanon. Lebanese are firing missiles into Israel every time there is something that they find it to be unacceptable. Israelis are not responding. Israelis say, well, we will reserve the time. When was in the history of Israel that missiles come into Israel and then they say we will reserve the right to respond in the right time and in the right manner? So that's the consequence of 2006.
Now, you and I, Ibrahim, we're peace advocates. Ultimately, in this analysis, we're looking for the prospects for peace. And so if Israel there are brakes on Israel's ability to use its military might, how serious is there any movement in Israel to settle the issues it has with the Palestinians and, frankly, with many other countries in the Arab world,
Strangely enough, Rob, there was one of the Knesset members that I can find out the name, began talking about this issue after Jenin. And he was telling, I mean, this is Israeli Knesset member. He was reminding the Israelis and the members of parliament that, look, we have reached the point that we cannot even go into Jenin. For how long this bloodshed had to last? We have no other alternative but to seriously think about settling and understanding and accepting that Palestinians have rights, and this issue has to be settled. But at the moment, they are few and far in between. But
Yes.
if this continues, I think the Israelis have no other option. Either war, which they know the consequence is going to be extremely costly, or somehow bite the bullet and say, well, we have tried our best. It hasn't worked. We might as well work with the Palestinians to settle it.
Oh yeah, final remark from me. A story. So when I was teaching at Korbel, I would have these people. They would sit in on the class. I never minded. But really, what they were trying to do was, what is he going to say about Israel and the Palestinians? But it was a class in global political economy, so I didn't really talk about it much. After one of these sessions, one of the students, a woman my age, comes to me and she says, I appreciated your course, but there's something I want to talk to you about. Of course, I knew what it was. So I said to her, I'm trying to figure out how can one structure the discussion so that it can be productive towards peace. So I think, I'm going to try the geographic approach. And I say to her, where's Israel? She says, what do you mean? I mean, she was stunned. She didn't get it. I had to say, Israel is in the Middle East. The logic being, if you want to have a long-term future in the Middle East, doesn't it make sense to make peace with your neighbors? And in order to make peace with your neighbors, you must first resolve what you call the Palestinian conflict, what I call the occupation. All right? That there's no way to avoid that. She looked at me and she says, what do you mean Israel's in the Middle East? She didn't believe me. So she's got a mental image of the Middle East. So I said to her, so let me get this straight. We're in Colorado, there's the East Coast, there's Long Island. At the end of Long Island, there's Montauk Point. And 10 miles off Montauk Point is Tel Aviv. And she said, yes. Mental map. Okay, mental map. Now, that map has to break down. For as long as I have been involved in trying to work for peace in the Middle East, it's been very simple. If Israel wants a future, it has to make peace with its neighbors. And to make peace with its neighbors, it cannot avoid making peace with Palestine. So I am...
Yeah, that's the first step.
That's right. Yes, the first step. And so I am hoping that out of this conflict right now and this war that we're talking about, that somewhere, hopefully, is the seed of a movement for peace.
Let's hope so.
Okay, my friend, shall we end it there? Do you have final, you want to respond to anything before we go? You know what? You're all of a sudden, I don't hear you. There you go. Back.
Beyond the fact that if there was a time that the Israelis need to step back and reflect,
right,
that the policies, doctrine that they have initiated, conducted during the past 70-some years, they have been nothing but futile in giving them supremacy. Is dead. So even they themselves are doubting whether this country, their country, is going to see the 80th year of their existence. I think with the threat of the North, the South, and the fact that the global geopolitics, as well as regional geopolitics, has changed I think it's about time that military mindset has to change. And as you said, understand the reality that you are in the Middle East,
Right.
and around you are Arab neighbors. And within the country itself, there are Palestinians. There are hundreds of thousands of Palestinians around the country, in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and other places. I think making peace means giving justice to them.
Of course.
And negotiating seriously, not just to paralyze, as Oslo was, not just serious negotiation. They say after 1967 war, somebody approached Moshe Dayan and said, "Are you in favor of negotiating with the Palestinians?" He said, "Yes, I have no problem with them,
Right.
as long as the negotiation doesn't get anywhere."
Right.
That mindset has to change.
Okay, agreed. So dear friends, listeners, we're going to do more of these programs. We'll do them pretty regularly, and we hope that you're able to catch them. Ibrahim, good night.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. Have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.